Hello, story lovers. Today we're not talking about a person or legend. No, today we are talking about a place, a city that made emperors weep, warriors die, and for the whole world to hold its breath. This is the story of Jerusalem, not just the holy city as we know it as today, but the heart of a centuries-long war between knights, kings, and empires. A city so powerful, even peace was dangerous. But first, let's rewind a bit and talk about how Jerusalem was first lost. Before knights ever rode across Europe with crosses on their chests, before Saladin and Balian ever met under a white flag, Jerusalem had already been lost and taken many times. According to the Bible, King David captured Jerusalem around 1000 BCE and made it the capital of the Kingdom of Israel. His son, King Solomon, built the legendary First Temple, the Holy Heart of Judaism. But that peace didn't last. By 586 BCE, the Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, stormed Jerusalem, destroyed the First Temple, and exiled the Jews to Babylon. That was the very first fall. Jerusalem changed hands many times after that. We had the Persians, who was ruled by Cyrus the Great, who let the Jews return and rebuild the Second Temple. Then came Alexander the Great and the Greeks. Eventually, the city was conquered by the Romans around 63 BCE. Now, under the Roman rule, things got violent, and in 70 CE, after a massive Jewish revolt, this was after Jesus Christ and his resurrection, the Roman general Titus destroyed the Second Temple, and over 1 million Jews were killed and the rest were scattered. By 135 CE, after another failed Jewish revolt, the Romans renamed the city as Aelia Capitolina and banned the Jews from entering their own land. In the 4th century, the Roman Empire converted to Christianity under Emperor Constantine. Jerusalem became a Christian city full of churches, monks, and pilgrims. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built on the supposed site of Jesus' tomb. For a few centuries, it was Christian ruled, but not yet Muslim, and not even Jewish either. But by the 600s, the Christian Byzantine Empire had fully taken control of Jerusalem. The Jews were still banned, tensions were high, the city was still Christian, but now it was vulnerable. There was a new force that had risen from the Arabian Peninsula, a new power. It was known as Islam. After the death of Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE, Muslim armies spread quickly through the Middle East. In 638 CE, the Muslim Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab entered Jerusalem peacefully after a short siege. The Christian patriarch Sophronius handed over the keys to the city. There was no massacre. Umar even refused to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to protect it from being turned into a mosque. Under the Muslim rule, Jews were finally allowed to return to Jerusalem again. Islam teaches that Prophet Muhammad was taken from Mecca to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem during the night journey, and from there he ascended to heaven. So they built the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, two of the holiest sites in Islam, right on the Temple Mount, the same spot where the Jewish temples once stood. Now, all three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, saw Jerusalem as sacred, and all three would fight for it. By the time the 11th century came around, Jerusalem had been under Muslim control for over 400 years. Christian pilgrims were still allowed in, but tensions grew. And when the Seljuk Turks, a new Muslim power, took over, they began harassing the pilgrims. Reports of violence and church destruction eventually reached Europe, and Pope Urban II used that anger to spark the First Crusade in 195. 4 years later, in the year 199, the Crusaders stormed Jerusalem and turned it into a Christian kingdom again. Okay, now, why did Jerusalem really matter? In the 1100s, Jerusalem wasn't just land, it was salvation. Okay, to the Christians, it was where Christ had died and risen. To the Muslims, it was the place where the Prophet Muhammad had ascended to heaven. To the Jews, it was once the site of Solomon's temple. And whoever controlled Jerusalem didn't just hold territory, They held religious power, the kind that justified wars and created legends. To many Christians in Europe, Jerusalem didn't just fall to the Muslims. It wasn't just one, it had been stolen from God to them. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II called on Christian knights to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. Tens of thousands responded, and by the year 1099, Crusaders breached the city walls after a brutal siege and massacred most of the Muslim and Jewish population inside, the opposite of what the Muslims had done when they had taken the land. It was bloody, it was brutal, but for the victors, for the Christians, the Crusaders, it was divine justice. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was born, a Christian kingdom in the middle of Muslim lands. It wouldn't last. Fast forward to the 1170s, and the man sitting on Jerusalem's throne is none other than Baldwin IV. He was just a teenager, but he was already battling leprosy. He was known as the Leper King. But don't let that disease fool you, okay? Baldwin was sharp, he was diplomatic, and he was smarter than most of his knights. He kept the kingdom alive, mostly by respecting his Muslim rival, Saladin. But Baldwin was dying, and behind him stood wolves in armor, men who wanted blood, not peace. Baldwin knew he was dying. He also knew one thing for sure. He did not want his sister's husband, Guy of Lusignan, anywhere near the throne. He tried everything to block him, even had his young nephew, Baldwin V, crowned while he was still alive just to keep Guy out. But Baldwin IV eventually dies, as well as Baldwin V, who also dies a year later. And just like that, the one guy Baldwin hated most is suddenly king of Jerusalem. Why? Because Baldwin's sister, Sibylla, pulls a power move. She grabs the crown for herself and then turns around and puts it on her husband's head. Boom! Guy of Lusignan is king. It's a disaster for Jerusalem. Guy is arrogant, clueless, and too proud to listen to anyone. His court is full of hotheads, especially Reynald of Chatillon, who basically wants to start a war with Saladin just because he can. And now with Baldwin gone and Guy in charge, the kingdom is heading straight for the cliffs, with the wolves dragging it in speed. Now, Reynald of Chatillon, a brutal and unpredictable crusader lord, had attacked Muslim caravans. He had tortured prisoners and even threatened Mecca. Saladin wanted him to stop, but Reynald just laughed in his face. That laugh would cost Jerusalem everything. Now, Saladin was a Kurdish general who had become Sultan, and he also had a vision: unite the Muslim world and take back Jerusalem. He was ruthless when needed, merciful when he chose to be. And in the year 1187, after Reynald broke the truce again, Saladin said enough is enough. He gathered a massive army and marched for war. In July 1187, the Christian Knights of Jerusalem rode out to face Saladin near the Horns of Atin, a dusty, dry battlefield near the Sea of Galilee. But they made a fatal mistake. They brought no water, and Saladin's men set the dry grass on fire. Surrounded, choking, and dying of thirst, the Crusader army collapsed, and King Guy of Lusignan was captured while Reynald was executed by Saladin himself. The Christian kingdom was broken. Jerusalem was in chaos now. Most of the knights were dead or captured after the disaster at Hattin. The city was packed with terrified refugees. There was no army, there was no hope. And then one man stepped up. Balian of Ibelin, a nobleman who had already surrendered and promised not to fight again. But when he saw what was happening in Jerusalem, he broke that oath. He rode back to the city, ready to help. Balian had fewer than a dozen real knights, so he did the unthinkable. He knighted civilians, armed priests, and shopkeepers and turned farmers into soldiers. Then he organized the defenses, reinforced the walls, set up guard rotations. He even gave speeches to keep the people from losing hope. When Saladin finally attacked, that siege lasted 12 days. The walls were bombarded with catapults and battering rams, but they held thanks to Balian's ingenuity. Finally, instead of letting the city burn, Balaam made Saladin an offer: surrender peacefully and spare the people. And Saladin agreed. The Muslims, Jews, and Christians were allowed to live safely if they could pay a ransom. Those who couldn't were still treated far better than what the Christian armies had done to Muslims in the past. And in the end, over 15,000 people walked out of Jerusalem alive because of Balaam. Saladin's mercy shocked Europe, of course. The Pope died of grief when he heard Jerusalem was lost again, and kings like Richard the Lionheart launched a third crusade, but he never retook the city. The Crusader kingdom would live in small coastal cities for a while longer, but Jerusalem was long gone. So that's the breakdown. The Jews lost it to the Babylonians, they got it back under the Persians, then lost it again to the Romans, who destroyed their temple. The Romans became Christians, who ruled until the Muslims took over. Then came the Crusaders, and then there was Saladin. Then we have the Ottomans, which is another story, as well as the British. Stories for another day. But today is still the center of one of the most complex conflicts in the world, with countries still fighting over that land. Jerusalem's fall wasn't just about swords and religion, it was about pride. It was about leaders who wouldn't keep peace. It was about enemies who showed more honor than their rivals. It was about a city that broke hearts for thousands of years. Today, Jerusalem remains one of the most fought over places on earth. But in 1187, it was a city that died, surrendered, and survived, all in one breath. I'm your host, Whimsical Amy. I hope you enjoyed today's edition. Join me next week for another intriguing story on Legends Untold. Until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, share. Thank you. Bye.